Good morning. Welcome to the BYU Real Estate Webinar Series. My name is Barrett, Slade, Professor of Finance. Before I introduce my co-host, I need to announce that this will be our last webinar for the winter term. We'll start back up again in September when we begin the fall semester. For calendaring purposes, we invite you to reserve September 30th for our annual BYU Real Estate Conference. We'll be sending out more details about that in the coming days. So today, my co-host is McKell Dalton, a former student at BYU who graduated with a bachelor's degree in finance and then completed the master's degree in real estate development at the University of Utah. She's presently an associate at the Woodbury Corporation. McKell, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you,
Thanks so
Barrett.
much for being here today and being my co-host. You've had some association with our presenter today, Whitney Ward. So would you introduce her and let her teach us about sustainability?
Yeah, I'm pleased to introduce our presenter, Whitney Ward, today. She's a principal with BCBO Architecture, where she's been since 2007. She specializes in pre-design, planning, and site development, sustainability. She also loves to, in her free time, spend time with her dog and her husband and work on her 100-year-old home. She also loves to ski. She was also a teacher at the University of Utah, an adjunct professor. And I had the opportunity to take her site planning class, her site development, site planning and sustainability class. I loved her passion that she had for sustainability and the built environment. She helped me to understand more about how I can be sustainable, both as an individual and a real estate professional. And before we turn the time over to her, I would like to let you know that if you have any questions that you'd like to submit to our presenter, Whitney, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom, and we'll get to those as time allows. Whitney, we'd love to turn the time over to you and to teach us a little bit more about sustainability.
Thanks, Barrett. Thanks, McKell. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and share something that I'm passionate about with everybody. So I just want to say I have a presentation here. Again, there's so much to talk about in the world of sustainability. So I'm cramming a lot of content into about 30 minutes. So hopefully we can get through it and open up some good conversations and questions and answers after the presentation. I always like to start a conversation around sustainability with the definition of sustainability. Sustainability has a lot of connotations. It has a lot of sort of preconceived notions of what that means, especially when we talk about it through the lens of development in buildings. But my favorite definition is the one that's up on the screen right now, which is really the capacity to endure. And that's what we're all looking for, is the opportunity to continue and to pass on the quality of life and the elements that we love so much about our world to future generations. And so to me, that's the heart and the root of sustainability. In 1987, the United Nations, the Brundtland Commission, came up with a little bit more expansive definition that's essentially the same thing, right? It's the ability of our society and of our cultures to meet the needs of the present without diminishing the ability of future generations to meet those needs. And ultimately, it's that same thing, right? It's really ensuring that as a society, as a culture, as a people, that we're conscientious about how we're living in a way that others can live in that same level. There's a really incredible YouTube video. So if you go to YouTube and you just Google sustainability simple definition, they walk you through what that means from a sort of physical and natural world limitations perspective. So how we can live and work and produce and thrive within the boundaries of what we have available to us within our natural world. Recognizing that there are some limitations on our planet, but we also have opportunities to bring in elements such as sunlight and other natural elements that can replenish and support the limitations of our natural world. And so this is a really great YouTube video if you guys want a 3-minute brief or maybe 7-minute brief on what sustainability means through the laws of science and physics. But ultimately, I think the thing that's most important through the lens of building and development is that environmental sustainability does not and cannot exist in and of itself. We can't just seek environmental sustainability without recognizing that the work that we're doing and the impacts that we have also have to be economically viable, and they have to be socially productive. We have a big job as professionals who work within the real estate realm and who develop within our communities, because not only are we creating spaces and places for our residents and our communities to live in and thrive in today, but the buildings that we create, the environments that we foster, exist for generations if we're doing our job correctly, right? None of us, some of us do some temporary work that we know is going to come and go in 20 years, but most of the work that we do, most of the impact we have will be there for 40, 60, 80, and if everything goes really well, 100 years and beyond. And so it's not just an impact that we have on the next 5 years or the next 10 years, but it's really the impact on those future generations. So we, more than many other professionals, have the opportunity to really impact sustainability and do what's right for everybody. And so I think that that's something that resonates with me and that I hope is important, you know, and if everybody's sort of thinking about as we endeavor into our next projects and work. And so I also wanted to talk about the idea of sustainability through that lens of the triple bottom line, or environmental, social, and economic viability ultimately. And interestingly, everybody else has been talking about this too. So in 2015, the United Nations actually came up with their 17 sustainable development goals. And their sustainable development goals are in alignment with that triple bottom line. And more importantly and interestingly, as you look at those 17 environmental or sustainability goals, you actually notice that only 4 of them are rooted firmly in environmental sustainability, that 8 of them are rooted in societal improvement, and 4 of them are rooted in economic viability, with the 17th sort of bringing them all together through partnerships. But in these UN sustainability goals, you notice that number 1 is no poverty. And that's a recognition that no matter what we do, we can't make successful and productive life choices if we're struggling to survive. And those people in poverty, their number 1 goal is survival. And so you have to get out of poverty. You have to get through education. You have to have access to food. You have to have access to clean water. You have to get beyond those true needs of existence and survival before you can really make productive conversations about how do we then reduce our impact? How do we make better choices? And again, gratefully, we live in a society, in a world, and those of you who are joining me, I'm sure do too, where survival isn't something that I have to think about on a daily basis. I've been blessed for many reasons to be able to think about now my environmental impact, because I don't worry about having food on the table. I don't worry about having a roof over my head. And so we're in a position to really be able to have a conversation about what can we do to give back and to be better and to progress forward with sustainability. And the other thing that I want to just think about for a moment, or perhaps remind everybody of, is that sustainability is not a new concept. In fact, it's a very, very old concept that we just need to remind ourselves of. So sustainability, some of the most sustainable developments or architecture that I can think of come from our early civilizations, through the teepees of the Plains tribes, where they really truly used the materials that they had at hand. They used the land. They recognized that they needed to move with the weather because they couldn't build or didn't want to build against the weather. And so the teepee has such a light touch on the land. You can pack it up, pick it up, move it. If you need a new one, you can hunt and gather and get everything that you need to build that in a matter of weeks, right? It's a very light touch, quick response, adaptable building. Another really great example that many of you may have seen are the Anasazi, the pre-Puebloan cliff dwellings down in southern Utah, Arizona. And again, this is such an incredible and innovative use of our natural world. So they're using the stone that's available on the site. They're using the natural protection of the cliffs, but also that sort of very consistent temperature of the earth. You know, if you go into a cliff or if you go underground, you know that it's consistently like 60-ish degrees, plus or minus 5 degrees year round. So they used the earth to temper and to provide a very comfortable living environment at a very early phase in our culture and society. And you can even see that in the Pantheon. The Pantheon was constructed, I believe, in about 27 BC. So this is this building that stands today that you can go and enjoy and see today is over 2,000 and almost 2,050 years old, right? And so this speaks to an architecture, a building that is not only sustainable in the fact that it's durable. I mean, my gosh, 2,000 years. I can't even imagine having a building that I've worked on have that cultural impact. But it's had that cultural impact because people love it. And so beauty is also a really integral component to sustainability and something that we can't lose sight of. We often talk about sustainability through the lens of carbon emissions, and I'll do that today too, or we talk about it through the lens of health and well-being. But beauty and contribution to society are as much a part of a sustainable building as anything else is. And so this is a great, incredible example of a sustainable development that has that ongoing, lasting impact. Some other ones that people might be familiar with that I personally consider really sustainable are like the Owanahee Lodge in Yosemite. There was a trend of what you might call parkitecture that happened in sort of the 1920s when we were romanticizing the westward expansion. Railroads were expanding. We wanted to get people into these incredible national parks. The architecture, the buildings that came out of that movement, again, looked towards what are the materials that are available to me in this place? What's the architecture that feels like it's a part of its natural environment? And how can I build this in a way that is both comfortable but also durable and will last through the test of time? And so, of course, we need to maintain these buildings and invest in them, but they really show that sort of true root of sustainable development, which is such a great opportunity to look back on what's been successful. There's been a lot of transformation in our society and in our world, and you guys all know this. One of the biggest impacts on our built environment was the post-World War II American dream, where all of a sudden with the GI Bill, with the westward expansion, with land available, everybody had this land and this home of their own within sight. And it's an incredible American dream. And we were able to do that also because of connectivity that was starting to take place in our society. We had access to cars, we had access to materials that perhaps didn't come from our backyard or within a couple 100 miles of where we lived. We were able to buy home kits from the Sears Roebuck Company and build homes. So between 1900 and 1950, there was a dramatic building boom in the United States with the post-war. And following that, we had the sort of Eisenhower interstate highway expansion. And all of a sudden, we were connected across the country, right? And so that was the Federal Highway Act was in 1956. And with the Federal Highway Act, we also saw an uptick in air travel and general sort of globalization that's occurred across our society. And with that, again, we saw a dramatic change in how we built, how we developed. All of a sudden, we didn't need to look towards building from wood because we lived in a forested area, or getting stone from the local quarries up in the canyons around us. And so we really had an opportunity to expand our design, expand our material use, and ship things from all over the world to create the place that we wanted. We weren't limited any longer in what we had. It was what our imagination wanted and what our dollars could afford. And so we saw a globalization, and this is my favorite example of this globalization sort of come to fruition, which is these images of McDonald's from all over the world. And do you guys, where do you think these McDonald's are located? Any thought?
Japan,
Yeah, Europe.
Yeah, yes and yes.
maybe US too.
Yeah, so we have Australia, we have Germany, we have Kanab, Utah. We do have Japan. There's all of these incredible, like we were able to take the McDonald's brand and make it look consistent globally without that limitation of what was available to us locally. And so that's both a blessing and a curse when it comes to sustainability, right? Because when you think about sustainability, it's the impact on the materials, the impact on the environment that we're creating. When we can ship materials all around the world, they inherently have a little bit higher environmental footprint. And so what we're seeing today and what really our wake-up call has been is the dramatic impact that buildings in the built environment have on our environment and the repercussions that we're seeing from our development and growth over time. And so, pretty typical statistics that I'm sure everybody has seen, buildings account for 36% of total energy use. That's climbing as transportation gets more and more efficient and effective, as industry gets more effective. 72% of electrical consumption, it's because we plug everything in our buildings, right? I plug my car into my garage, and so technically my vehicle is associated with my building energy or electricity consumption. but 39% of carbon dioxide emissions, 50% of natural resources go into our buildings and our built environment. So this really does speak to the role that we have to play and the impact that the choices that we make as developers and professionals, again, working within the realm of the built environment. And the other thing that has come up more recently, of course, is the impact of carbon on our environment, on our health and well-being. And one of the things I'm going to look at today is the role of carbon both in emissions, which is what we think of typically, the energy that we're using to power our buildings, to heat our buildings, to keep us comfortable. But there's also a really important impact of carbon through the extraction, manufacture, and lifespan of our building materials. And that's called embodied carbon. And so I'm going to talk about both operational carbon and embodied carbon, some of the things that we're doing to counteract those. The other thing, shockingly, we've recently been going through a global pandemic, and we've learned that not only do our carbon impacts in our building matter, but also the health and well-being that our buildings sort of engender in those who live in them matters too. And so not only do we know the value of sort of protecting each other from germs, but also high quality ventilation, effective bringing outdoor air into our buildings, and the ability to clean our buildings is a huge factor that we're now considering more so than ever before. We talked a little bit about building health after the sick building scenarios in the 1970s and 80s, when we realized that we really needed to be conscientious about moisture management in our building with mold. And now it's gone well beyond mold and into general personal health and well-being. So we have a lot of new things that we're exploring, new technologies that we're exploring, but really working towards optimal environments. And I love this diagram. It's one of my favorites. And this speaks to sort of the evolution of technology, buildings, development, all of the things through three really simple diagrams. And so see the 19th century home was a simple structure with windows that opened and a fireplace that created heat. And that was your heating and cooling. Eventually we brought in candles and then for lighting and then electricity. And then as we discovered more about how technologies could help support our comfort and our sense of well-being, again, our goal is always to be happier, healthier, more comfortable, expand our lifespan. We used a lot of incredible technologies. Furnaces, central air conditioning systems. We started bringing in all of these components just to make our buildings produce heat and cool and comfort and light in a way that allowed us to be more productive and happier and healthier. And those are all really good things, but those use a lot of energy and they have a lot of impact. And in fact, they have a lot of maintenance associated with them, right? And so now what we're doing is we're looking towards really, how can we bring the best of both worlds together? How can we bring the elements that exist in our natural world through sunshine, through the consistent temperature of the earth, together with really efficient technology systems to maintain the level of comfort that we want, but ultimately to do that with a smaller footprint and to do it smarter. We want to always work smarter, not harder, right? And so I wanted to take the last sort of half of the presentation and talk about what we're seeing today and what's transforming, what the trends are, and where I think sustainability is going at a minimum. And so this is just an image from Google Earth of downtown Provo. And I think that this image speaks to a lot of the built environment that we experience. Especially out west, we're not especially old societies or cultures. So some of our oldest buildings are a couple hundred years old, right? And we love them and we cherish them and we really appreciate them. I think the Provo Temple, although it's been recently reconstructed, is a great example of that. And then there's a lot of buildings in our built environment that were constructed sort of between 1900 and today. And there's a dramatic range in what those buildings are in terms of technology, height, building materials. And so you can kind of see that evolution in our built environment. But more recently, we are seeing some very specific trends. And so one of those trends is a reduction in energy consumption in our buildings. And so this graph on the left here just is that same graph we were just looking at, which today our highest environmental impact of our buildings is our operational carbon footprint. And so about 51% of the emissions from buildings comes from that operational footprint. 49% actually comes from that embodied carbon that I spoke of. And we have a ton of technologies available to us to reduce our operational carbon footprint. And so the image or graph on the right speaks to, the existing average building stock, of course, has a higher footprint because of all those systems and technologies that were incorporated in. It also has a higher carbon footprint because our building envelopes weren't always as robust as they are today. We've learned a lot about building science in the last 10 years, about the value of continuous insulation on the outside of your building, having a really effective air moisture barrier so you can keep outside air and moisture out, inside air and moisture in, and that really reduces the amount of energy our mechanical systems need to use to overcompensate and to heat and cool our buildings. And so we have a ton of energy that we can reduce by a good building envelope and then bringing in state-of-the-art mechanical technologies to heat and cool our building. And then we further diminish our energy use by bringing in high quality daylight into our buildings so that we don't have to use electricity to light our offices and our work environments, our classrooms during the day, if there's enough outdoor light available. And really looking at how we can control both our lighting and our broader building system so that we're not running them when we don't need to be running them. And then finally, we also know that the way that we work in our buildings has an impact on our energy impact. And so leaving elements that draw energy plugged in and turned on. So like, let's say your computer monitors are on 24 hours a day. If we just turn those off at night, we can reduce our energy consumption. If we go from desktops to laptops in our operations, that dramatically reduces energy consumption over time. And so there's a lot of things we can do in how we use our buildings. We can then couple that with renewable energy systems, and all of a sudden we can get down to a net zero energy building with very simple, accessible steps. And so net zero energy is essentially a building that generates as much energy as it uses through the course of a year. And there's a lot of definitions, some are on-site, some are off-site. There's a lot of ways you can address that. But the thing that's really great is net zero energy buildings are not only accessible, but they exist all around us. So these are just a smattering of examples from our office of 3 net zero buildings. So we have the Davis School District Odyssey Elementary School. This is an elementary school prototype. It's the first of 4 operational net zero elementary schools for Davis School District, which is pretty incredible. Now you might say a school is only operating 9 months out of the year, so it's easier to achieve net zero, which can be true. So I have 2 other projects that are year-round operations. So we have Ivins City Hall. It just finished construction just outside of St. George down in Ivins, and it's on track to be a net zero energy building. It also happens to have a really beautiful rammed earth wall. I won't get too distracted on that one. And then we actually have the Ben Lomond Athletic Center up in Ogden, which is generating about 94 to 97% of its energy on site because it's so well loved. They're actually using it a lot more than we had predicted, which is a win for everybody, right? And so not only do we have local examples of these really incredible buildings, but beyond carbon neutral or net zero energy buildings, we're seeing a lot of really incredible transformation of buildings. So this is the Wendell Wyatt Federal Building, and it's in Portland, Oregon. And this was a building that was built in the 70s, and it's one of those sort of brutalist big concrete boxes. And instead of tearing it down, the GSA said, let's try to renovate it and give it a new life. And so they completely renovated the building, they gutted it, they replaced all of the windows with higher performing glazing, but they also let more daylight in. They incorporated nature into the atrium and into the wall. You can see that they're using a living wall screen to help provide shade for the building in the summer months and allow the sunlight to enter in the winter months. And they doubled the lifespan of this building. They're generating in the rooftop array, they're generating between 10 and 20% of the energy used by the building, but they've also dramatically driven down energy use by replacing the building envelope systems, mechanical systems, and lighting systems within that envelope. And again, the embodied carbon of maintaining that structure makes it a much more sustainable building than anything we could build today. Some other great examples of sustainability that aren't in buildings, but in the way we influence our built environment are things like the High Line in New York City. Have you guys been to that? It's incredible, right? The High Line was a dilapidated, elevated rail line in a sort of underloved area of the city. And as soon as they came in and they transformed it into this really beautiful linear landscape park, all of a sudden it brought people there, it brought vibrancy, land values rose, quality of life rose for everybody around it. And so this is a small move in a very sustainable way that really gets to the heart of what we can do with the work that we're doing. Another example of a truly sustainable building is the Bullitt Center. And this is a commercial office building in Seattle. This one actually opened in 2012. So it's also coming up on 10 years of operation, and it was revolutionary when it opened. So the Bullitt Center actually generates more energy than it uses. It has cleaner water coming out of the building than the water that comes into the building, and is looking towards water neutrality. It has not only a reduced sort of environmental footprint as a mass timber construction building, but it also, because of all of its sustainable features, is economically viable. They were able to get higher lease rates out of it to overcome the increased cost of construction, because there were so many companies whose values aligned with the sustainable vision of this building that they're willing to pay more to live in that building and to have that represent who they are as an organization. So again, sustainability might cost more, it might not. We can have a conversation about that later, but there are opportunities also to overcompensate and to make up for some of those additional costs. And so some of the unique features of the Bullitt Center that we have not adopted across our whole built environment yet, but are interesting conversations. They have composting toilets. So the effluent from their toilets actually goes down into a mass composting system and can be used and sold as landscape compost over time. And they use a vacuum system which reduces the water use in their toilets. It's a fun one. Composting toilets are always really fun. But they also have a very slow moving elevator. And the idea is to discourage people from using the elevator, encourage them to use the stairs when they can to reduce the energy consumption, right? Some small moves that have impacts on the way people live and work in this building. And then finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the future of development, some of the trends that we're seeing beyond what I just spoke about. And so, of course, everybody's seeing market drivers, and conveniently for me, these market drivers directly align with the triple bottom line. We're seeing economic viability as a must-have today. And so buildings have to be profitable, they have to be durable, they have to be operationally affordable. All of those elements are incredibly important. They also need to be adaptable. We now know, and we've always known, but now more than ever, we're seeing dramatic influx of office space needs reducing, residential needs increasing, and knowing that our buildings need to be able to adapt and evolve to whatever's happening there. They also need to be environmentally responsible. We're seeing pressures from investors, we're seeing pressures from our communities and the people who live within them, from our children, to recognize the impact we have on our environment and to push that through in the way that we build. And then we also are seeing pressures for socially effective, and that's health and well-being of the people who live in and or interact with our buildings. And we're also seeing a lot of conversation around accessible, age-engaged, and appropriate buildings, which is kind of pushing the market in a new direction. It's exciting. And so with these market drivers, of course, our systems are catching up with them. And so technology integration is becoming more and more prevalent. I just installed a new light switch in my house, and it's connected to my smartphone. So now I can turn on and off all of my lights from my bed. I don't have to actually get up to turn the bedside light off anymore. But so you guys, we're all seeing this technology integration, whether it's smart fridges, that's rippling through our buildings into controlling energy that might be generated on site, bringing it into a battery system, distributing that as we need the energy or holding it as we don't need the energy, connecting to an electric car, connecting to a microgrid of a community that you live in. So we're seeing a lot of really incredible technologies that are helping us not only use energy more efficiently, but understand how we use it and direct it appropriately within our buildings and our communities. We're also seeing, again, that need for adaptability and connectivity. So we don't all go to the office anymore. A lot of us are working from home. So access to the internet in every point in our community becomes a requirement so that people can live and work wherever they are. We're seeing a need for transportation. I've talked a lot about buildings in this presentation, but our transportation infrastructure is also changing dramatically. And everybody driving a car ultimately might not be viable for our communities. We might not be able to accommodate the road widths and the improvements to move everybody from point A to point B in a vehicle. And so integration and expansion of transit, alternative transportation options, active transportation options aligned with our healthy lifestyle goals that we have, and tying those into where and how we build. So transit-oriented development is a huge trend that will absolutely continue, but also the idea that our buildings can expand and contract as necessary and integrate green space and open space into them. Again, we're also seeing a transformation of our building materials, and this speaks to that concept of embodied carbon. We know that, for example, concrete has a really high level of embodied carbon. Concrete also has a long lifespan. So there's a balance there in how we use concrete, but we're learning and developing technologies such as mass timber that allow us to go higher in construction using a technology, an old technology of wood, in a new way that reduces the embodied carbon in the building materials we use and the overall impacts on lifespan for those materials. We also have technologies in glass and carpets and everything that we put into our building. Everybody's striving to be better. And we just need to keep pushing in that direction to continue to drive down that carbon footprint. And again, creating buildings that people love, that we want to maintain and preserve in our society, is the best thing you can do for embodied carbon, because that means that that impact has a much longer lifespan. And then finally, healthy buildings and healthy occupants are a key priority and driver that will do nothing but continue to push forward. And so the images here on the right is a diagram developed by the MIT Real Estate Innovation Lab, and it speaks to everything from integrating plant life into our buildings to help clean the air, to engaging daylight, ergonomic work environments, sit-stand desks, more comfortable chairs, things that we're seeing on a daily basis, but even providing fitness spaces within our buildings, integrating art and beauty in our buildings in a way that people love where they are, and they have an opportunity for mental excitement and engagement, or mental rest and quietness, depending on where we are, is something that we're thinking about in our designs and in new buildings. So ultimately, I know that's been a whirlwind of information, but that was my sustainability in a glance. And I would love to get questions and talk with you guys about what this means and where we're going.
That's great. That was a great presentation. Thank you so much, Whitney. As you know, I work for Woodbury Corporation, a 103-year-old commercial real estate developer out of Salt Lake City. How can we as developers implement some of these sustainability features into our projects while also remaining budget friendly? I think there are many developers that want to reduce their carbon footprint, but it can be difficult to make a deal pencil sometimes, especially with the way that costs and interest rates are rising.
You know, it's a really great question. And there's a couple of strategies that we've been looking at in our projects recently that I think make sense for everybody to consider. The first one actually, and this is my rule of thumb, is if you can go all electric, do that. And the reason being is our grid is getting cleaner and cleaner year after year. We now know that it's cheaper to generate electricity using renewable resources than it is to extract natural resources and generate electricity. We still have issues with storage. I'm not saying it's a perfect solution, but our grid is inherently getting cleaner and cleaner and cleaner year over year. And states and governments are pushing for more renewable energy, recognizing the impact our buildings and our built environment has on the environment. And so if you do nothing but go all electric in your building mechanical systems, then year over year, your environmental impact will be reduced as the grid gets cleaner. And so we have some great technologies, whether it's VRF systems or other sort of heat pump, fluid-based heating and cooling systems available to us. So electric heat isn't what it used to be. So we now are learning we can do all electric heating and cooling systems and help again contribute to that reduction. The other great thing about going all electric is if you have the ability in the future to purchase renewable energy, whether it be on site or through a purchase through a power company, you can continually reduce the impact that your project has on the environment, just with that small step. The other thing that we see is being smart about what materials you use in your building and not duplicating materials if you can avoid it. So Odyssey Elementary School, which I shared an image of with you, has exposed concrete flooring on the ground floor in the common spaces. So where we would typically put in a vinyl composite tile or something that's durable and resilient to the students, we now know we don't have to do that. Maybe we spend a little bit more on our concrete, but it's still cheaper than adding a whole nother layer of flooring into the project in key areas. Now we want carpet for acoustics in other areas, so we want to be conscientious about that, but really being thoughtful about what materials you use and how you can effectively use the materials from your structure to act as finished materials in key locations means you can sort of take money from buckets and put them into other buckets. The other thing that I try to really focus on is putting the money where it matters. So our building envelopes, you don't replace the insulation in your building over the life of the building unless your building is over 60 years old, really. And so really dedicating your focus to putting cost into the elements that will influence its performance over time, such as insulation, air moisture barriers, things like that, is really important.
That's great.
Great, Whitney, this has been really awesome. Thank you. Talk a little bit about employee productivity in these more sustainable buildings, because if you have greater, happier employees, more productive employees, maybe you can afford to up the rent a little, pay a little in rent for that. That would help with this offsetting, cost versus rents. Talk a little bit about that, Kevin.
You're exactly right. So there's actually been a number of studies about productivity and engagement in schools, in work environments, and looking at a traditional sort of architecture versus a new sustainable architecture. And they've found that kids score higher on tests, they're more engaged, they're more focused in schools that have access to daylight, that have a higher quality of indoor air, that absentees are reduced dramatically. And that translates not only in schools, but up into our work environments. And actually, one of the most interesting studies that EPA did, a robust study on productivity in the work environment. And they actually say one of the best values or benefits of green buildings is presenteeism reduction. So a lot of people, if you're working in a building where it's stuffy or you're thermally uncomfortable, you're not really engaged in the work that you're doing because you're more concerned about how you're feeling and the fact that you're not feeling comfortable. So you might be physically present at work, but you're not perhaps as engaged or as mentally in tune with what you're doing as you could be. And so a building that has the ability for you to be more comfortable, whether that's through opening and closing a window, controlling airflow in your space, having a thermostat, and having access to daylight, means you're going to be more physically, mentally engaged in the work that you're doing and more productive ultimately. Turnover rates are reduced, sick days are reduced. And, when you look at the cost of a building, in an office building, it's like a iceberg. The cost of construction is the tip of the iceberg. The real costs are in the cost of the people who live in it over time. And so if you do spend a little bit more in that construction to create that more productive environment, you'll save it time and time again in the cost savings and the people who live in it.
Interesting. Thank you.
I have a real life example question for you,
Yeah.
Whitney. So Woodbury is partnering with PEG and Desert Color St. George on a 180-acre commercial site down in St. George, which is, as you know, middle of the desert. They're very conscious about water conservation. What are some specific sustainability practices that can be done as far as water conservation, water recycling when it comes to developing and building buildings?
So my first answer is going to be maybe a little bit surprising, especially for St. George. But the best thing you can do for water conservation is actually creating more compact development and reducing the amount of sort of yard space associated with your developments, especially down in the desert. Landscape takes water to thrive. Even desertscape to get adapted needs some water. And so recognizing the value of bringing development closer together, reducing the impact on the land, creating more compact development is one really great way to reduce water use. And then there's always a really easy low-hanging fruit in the way that you build. So one is not having grass. Grass requires sprinklers to irrigate it. going to more of a desert scape with drip irrigation at the plants where you need it, using secondary water instead of potable water for the landscaping, so that that water doesn't, you're not using treated processed water for your landscaping where you don't need to. And then of course in your building itself, just using low flow fixtures. So there's, again, the US government, like they have the Energy Star program, they also have a Water Sense program. And so Water Sense identifies fixtures that are inherently lower water users. So low flow toilets, low flow faucets, shower heads, things like that. So always look for the little Water Sense label, just like you would the Energy Star label.
Great idea. Love that.
Thank you, Whitney. We have a question from someone from the audience.
Yeah.
Says, from your vantage point, what are you seeing in technological advancements in electrical storage?
So battery storage is absolutely work in progress, but we are seeing advancements in the minerals, the technology going into the battery system, as well as the lifespan of the battery system. The other thing that we're seeing, and I should say I'm not a battery expert, so this is relatively high level. The other thing we are seeing is the ability to recycle batteries, because batteries, and I drive an electric car, and my husband and I have gone through the conversation about the environmental impacts of combustion engines versus batteries over and over again. Fun dinner time conversation. But batteries are made from oftentimes rare earth minerals and are hard to recycle and have an environmental impact of their own. But we're seeing the use of more abundant materials. We're seeing the use of new technologies and recyclability increasing in batteries. And so those are all really great advancements that we're seeing. And I think we're gonna, the more pressure the markets get, the more technological advancement you see, like anything. And so I think that as more people are buying electric vehicles, as more people are getting solar on their home and tying that to a battery pack, as more communities recognize the value of integration of renewable energy, but the need to store it, we're gonna see battery packs expand and the technology advance.
One project you had an integral role in designing that I wanted to ask you about. You took us on a site tour of the University of Utah, the law building there.
Yeah.
And I remember you showing us all the cool, sustainability aspects that went into the design of that building. Do you want to talk about some of those that you showed us and talked about? Because I think that was a really fascinating building.
So the law school, the S.J. Quinney College of Law at the University of Utah, had an opportunity to build a new building at the gateway to campus. So they're right behind the stadium. And it was just when the University of Utah moved into the Pac-12. And so they were very visible during football games. They were really excited about the opportunity. They also recognized their role as an academic institution in driving progress forward. And so sustainability was not just a goal of theirs, but a core tenet. And they were interested in transformative technologies and using this building as a showcase for sustainability. So it's a LEED Platinum certified building, which means it has achieved a number of very sustainable elements, all the way from energy efficiency and mechanical systems through to indoor air quality, sort of environmental comfort and site design strategies. So some of the key things that were really fun there is we got to use a chilled beam mechanical system, which is a new version of an old radiant system. So you use hot water and cold water to heat and cool the building and just bring in air for ventilation. And so that one was really interesting because not only was it an innovative mechanical system, but it allowed us to shrink our floor to floor heights because we didn't have to have those big ducts, which actually brought the building down. It's a 6-story building. It brought it down below high-rise level. And so we're able to save a ton of money in our life safety systems that then helped go back into paying for the upcharge for the mechanical system. So those are some of the pros and cons that you see in like give and takes in sustainable building. They have a wastewater treatment and reuse system where they take the water from the sinks and the showers and the some of the gray water drains, and they recycle that and use it for toilet flushing on the ground floors. They have building integrated photovoltaics. They looked at a range of different PV panels. They have some that are sort of provide shade for their terrace, and then they have a more intensive PV array that provides shade at their parking lot. And so they use different technologies in different locations. But ultimately, they were really focused on creating a building that was both sustainable and that people loved and that they wanted to be in. So they were planning on almost a 24-hour building and a building that will contribute to the University of Utah for, again, 75 plus years to come. So there's some really exciting things that we were able to do as a part of that project. and donors that came forward just to pay for the sustainability features, because that's what was important to them. And so that was a really fun opportunity.
Brittany, this has been wonderful. We're about out of time, and we'd like to conclude with maybe a nugget of wisdom that you would have for students who are on the call. We've got graduation that'll be happening this week. A lot of our students will be graduating and entering the workforce. Based upon your experience, what might you share with them as they begin their career? Just a minute or two.
This is going to be shocking advice, but I will say, find something that you're passionate about. I mean, we spend the majority of our adult lives working, and it's important that the work that we do is something that we love, that we're excited about, that we're passionate about, and that you want to do day in and day out. And I think that that's really important. So that's my advice.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you. And for all of you who have joined us today, as well as this semester, we are grateful for your support. We hope that you've enjoyed this series this term. We look forward to joining you again in the fall, and we hope that you have a wonderful, safe summer. Have a wonderful afternoon.